Today, we're uncovering the final moments of a Filipino content creator who built her reputation handling one of the most powerful snakes on Earth, only to lose control of it while the cameras were still rolling. And it started, like most catastrophes, in a place that felt completely safe. On the evening of August 14th, 2018, the heat had not broken the way it sometimes did after sundown. It was one of those humid August nights in Cebu when the air refuses to cool after dark, sitting heavy and motionless, thick with the kind of humidity that clings to skin and makes the inside of a closed garage feel like the inside of a sealed container. The neighborhood had gone quiet, doors shut, fans running, people staying indoors. The streets were largely empty. There was no wind, the kind of night where sound carried farther than usual, and where the stillness itself felt like a presence. Alyssa Navarro was 23 years old. She lived alone in a modest single-story home on the edge of a residential neighborhood, the kind of property that sat close enough to other houses to feel occupied, but far enough from the main road to feel removed from everything. The house had a detached garage at the back, separated from the main living area by a short stretch of open ground. It was the kind of space that accumulates things over time. Plastic tubs, folding furniture, equipment that doesn't quite belong inside the house, but hasn't been thrown away either. For Alyssa, it had recently become a filming location. She had been building a presence on social media for just over a year. Her content centered on reptiles and exotic animals. Not animals she owned herself, but creatures that belonged to friends and acquaintances who kept them as a hobby. Geckos, tarantulas, small snakes, the occasional unusual insect. She would borrow the animals, film herself handling them, and post the footage to her account. Her following had grown steadily, reaching just under 20,000 followers over the course of the year. For a creator working without a budget, without professional equipment, and without any formal background in animal handling, that number represented real effort and real time. But in the months leading up to August, the growth had stalled. Engagement had begun to decline. Views were dropping. Comments were thinning out. The algorithm that had once pushed her content to new audiences had shifted, and the steady climb she had grown accustomed to had flattened into something closer to a slow retreat. It was the kind of plateau that many small creators hit and never recover from, and Alyssa was aware of it. She had been watching the numbers closely enough to know that something needed to change. The adjustment she landed on was live streaming. Unlike edited videos, live content carried a different kind of energy, unscripted, immediate, unpredictable in the way that kept people watching. Alyssa had started experimenting with longer live sessions over the preceding weeks, handling animals while talking to her audience, letting the stream run without a fixed endpoint. The viewer counts on her live sessions were running higher than on her regular posts, and the chat activity was more engaged than anything she had seen in months. She was looking for a way to build on that momentum. Among the people in her circle was a friend who kept a private collection of reptiles. The centerpiece was a captive reticulated python, a large one measuring just over 5 meters from head to tail. Reticulated pythons are the longest snake species in the world. In the wild, they are ambush predators capable of taking down prey significantly larger than themselves through constriction. In captivity, they can be kept and handled safely, but safety at that size comes with a specific and non-negotiable set of conditions. Experienced keepers who work with constrictors exceeding 4 meters follow a standard that is widely understood within the reptile keeping community. No one handles an animal of that size alone. The rule exists because of the physics of the situation. A reticulated python of 5 meters can weigh 40 to 50 kilograms or more. Once it anchors a coil around a person's neck, shoulders, or upper chest, the force required to remove that coil exceeds what a single person can generate with their own hands while simultaneously trying to stay upright and breathe. The snake does not need to be aggressive. It simply needs to tighten, and the outcome becomes a matter of time. The friend who owned the python was away from home that evening. Alyssa had made arrangements to access the animal in his absence. The snake had been transported in a reinforced plastic tub, the same container its owner normally used when moving it between enclosures. And by the time Alyssa set up the garage, the python was already inside it, the lid secured. She positioned her phone on a tripod, framing the space in front of the folding table where the container had been placed and prepared to go live. There was no one else in the garage. There was no one else on the property. At shortly after 8 o'clock in the evening, the stream went live. The opening minutes were unhurried. Alyssa moved around the space, talked to the camera, acknowledged the viewers as they joined. She mentioned being nervous. She answered questions about the snake, its size, its temperament, how long her friend had kept it. The chat was active from the start, and as the minutes passed, viewers continued to join. For a creator whose recent streams had been pulling modest numbers, that early momentum shifted the energy from cautious to confident. Encouraged by the response, she moved toward the container. She removed the lid and lifted the python out with both arms. The snake came out without resistance. It was heavy, the kind of weight that settles into your arms differently than anything else, distributed unevenly along a body that has no fixed shape. The python draped itself across both of her forearms, its thick midsection resting against her chest, its head moving slowly in the way that large constrictors do when alert but not agitated. To the viewers watching, it looked manageable. To Alyssa, who had handled smaller snakes before but had no documented experience with an animal of this size, it may have felt the same way. The chat filled with reactions. Questions came in about the snake's length, its weight, whether it had ever bitten anyone. Several viewers made the same suggestion, that she should drape the snake across her shoulders so its full length could be seen on camera. It was a reasonable request from a viewer's perspective. A snake of 5 meters held across 2 arms doesn't read as 5 meters on a phone screen. Across the shoulders, with the body hanging down on both sides, the scale becomes visible. It makes for a better shot. Some viewers assumed the whole thing was staged. Others typed warnings into the chat as the snake settled into position. Alyssa hesitated for a moment. Then she lifted the python and settled it across the back of her neck and shoulders. The garage was warm, a closed concrete space on a humid August evening with no ventilation. Snakes are ectothermic, their body temperature regulated by their environment, and a warm environment keeps them active and alert. Large constrictors in captivity are most likely to exhibit defensive behavior, not because of hunger, but because of instability. A handler losing their footing, a sudden shift in grip, or any movement that signals to the animal that its anchor point is uncertain. As Alyssa adjusted her grip, the python moved with her. It slid one thick coil across the back of her neck and let the rest of its body hang down her front. Large constrictors do this constantly during handling, always searching for a stable anchor point, always redistributing their weight, always looking for something to wrap around. The behavior is instinctive, and in the early stages, it is almost indistinguishable from what happens next. The snake's head turned suddenly, striking forward in a short, fast motion. The bite itself was brief, a single rapid contact, but in the same instant the python began looping its body around her shoulders. The reaction was instinctive. A handler who flinches or pulls back at a bite creates exactly the kind of sudden movement that triggers a stronger constriction response. The coil tightened. Viewers began to notice before Alyssa had fully registered what was happening. The chat shifted. Questions and reactions gave way to warnings. The messages came in fast, overlapping, the kind of chat activity that happens when an audience collectively realizes that what they are watching has changed. Instead of working from the tail end of the snake's body, the standard technique experienced handlers use to begin unwinding large constrictors, Alyssa reached for the coil closest to her neck. It was the instinctive response, but it was the wrong one. The sudden resistance triggered a stronger constriction response. The python tightened again, this time with considerably more force. The coil across the back of her neck pressed down. The section of the snake's body draped across her chest began to compress inward. Her breathing became audibly strained. She stepped backward, trying to create space, to shift the snake's weight, to find some angle from which she could pull the coil free. The python responded by wrapping an additional loop around her arm and upper torso. It was not attacking in the way a venomous snake attacks. The initial bite had already been and gone. What remained was grip, an animal that had found an anchor point and was holding on. A 5-meter reticulated python, once it has anchored coils around a person's upper body, cannot be removed by that person acting alone. The weight of the animal, 40 to 50 kilograms distributed across the shoulders, chest, and arms, is enough to compromise balance and restrict movement. Beyond the mechanical compression of the chest wall, constriction works by interfering with circulation as well. Each time the person exhales slightly, the coils tighten a fraction further and hold, preventing the chest from re-expanding fully and simultaneously compressing major blood vessels. The combined effect on breathing and circulation means the body is deprived of oxygen from two directions at once. This is not a slow process. Experienced handlers know this. They know it because the knowledge has been passed down through years of documented incidents involving people who worked with large constrictors without a second person present. Alyssa was alone in the garage. There was no one to hear her. There was no one to help. She continued to struggle. As she moved backward, trying to keep her balance, she stepped out of the camera's field of view. The frame showed an empty stretch of concrete floor, the container, the table, the stacked tubs along the wall. Off camera, the sounds continued. Movement, the scrape of feet on concrete, breathing that was labored and irregular, the sound of a chest working against resistance it could not overcome. Then, after several minutes, the sounds changed. A heavier impact, the sound of someone losing their footing and going down. Then quiet breathing. Then nothing. The constriction continued after she lost consciousness. By the time the sounds had stopped entirely, the process had already run its course. Then the phone battery died, and the stream ended without warning. No final frame, just a cut to black, and then nothing. The viewers left behind had no immediate resolution. Some had seen enough to be alarmed. Others had watched the stream end and assumed the battery had simply died at an inconvenient moment, that Alyssa had gotten the snake under control and would post an update later. Concerned viewers attempted to reach her through the platform in the hours that followed. Messages were sent. None received a response. The garage was detached from the main living area. From the street, from the neighboring properties, from anywhere outside the structure itself, there was nothing visible to indicate that anything had gone wrong. The neighborhood was quiet. The night passed the way nights do in residential areas, slowly, without incident, without anyone knowing that anything had changed. The following morning, after repeated calls and messages had gone unanswered overnight, a relative made the decision to go to the house and check on her in person. The relative arrived to find the property looking as it always did from the outside. The garage door was closed. There was no sound from inside. When the door was opened, Alyssa was found on the concrete floor. The python remained partially looped around her torso, its body draped across the floor nearby. Emergency responders were contacted and arrived at the scene, but there was nothing to be done. Alyssa had been dead for several hours. The cause was prolonged constriction. The sustained pressure from the snake's coils had simultaneously restricted the expansion of her chest and compressed the blood vessels supplying oxygen to her body. Neither breathing nor circulation could function normally under that sustained force, and her body had eventually given out. The snake was removed and secured by experienced handlers who arrived separately. She was 23 years old. In the days that followed, the story circulated through the communities that follow both reptile keeping and social media incidents. The details were reported and discussed: the size of the snake, the fact that she had been alone, the fact that the stream had captured the beginning of the encounter before cutting off. Within the reptile-keeping community, the response was one of grim recognition. The conditions that led to the outcome were not unusual. They were exactly the conditions that experienced keepers spend years warning against. A large constrictor, a single handler, no second person present, no way to call for help once the snake had anchored its coils. The standard precaution that no one should handle a reticulated python exceeding 4 or 5 meters without at least one other person present and capable of intervening is not an arbitrary rule. It exists because of what happens when it is not followed. The snake does not need to be provoked into predatory behavior. A brief defensive response, the kind triggered by instability or a sudden movement, is enough to set the sequence in motion. Once the coils are anchored, the person holding the snake needs to be alone, and the outcome becomes a matter of physics and time. Footage of the incident circulated shortly before being deleted by social media platforms due to its high graphic content. and her social media deletion eventually followed in her family's request.